Welcome, one and all, old and new. It makes us so happy to see you all every time we start a Rising Star new series. And the support that you all have given us to see all these top clinicians share the center stage with our celebrity panelists to have a discussion about the eminent new technologies and procedures in patient care. Can we start the presentation? For the folks who haven't been with us last time, Rising Stars in Ophthalmology Season 1 is a 9-episode interactive series that will focus on bringing you the absolutely new and innovative technologies from speakers that, according to me, are some of the finest clinicians, surgeons, and orators in the new world of ophthalmology as we see today. The program is being aired, next. The program is being aired on our website, risingstars.com, risingeyestars.com, and on our Facebook and YouTube channels of Rising Stars in Ophthalmology. Since the series is a global event and the timings may not suit the rest of the world, all the episodes will be available on the website Rising Eye Stars for everyone to view. But only for our website, so don't miss out going back and watching these if you have missed any of the other episodes. As of today, we have a fabulous celebrity panel crew on board and also a speaker who needs no introduction, talking about achieving outstanding refractive outcomes in challenging cataract surgery. This is something very close to my heart, and I would love to introduce Jennifer Lowe to introduce a special talk for the day and then introduce the panel and speakers. Jen, all yours.
Thank you so much, Ashvin. It's such a pleasure, as always, to be here and to be one of your moderators. To get things started, I'd like to introduce the famous Dr. Kathy McCabe from Florida, and she's going to share a brief video with us, as well as I'd like to thank all of our sponsors, including our featured sponsor for tonight, Alcon.
Yes, so I am going to share a video that was really so much fun to put together. We've all been using new technology, and the PanOptix lens has been a wonderful asset, and it has really allowed our patients to enjoy that nice continuous intermediate to near and distance vision. And just talking about that, kind of how I see my visual needs in a kind of fun video. So I hope you all enjoy it. Hi, I'm Dr. Kathleen McCabe, and I live in Sarasota, Florida. Sarasota is an artsy community. Many of my patients are musicians, artists, and crafters. There are many creative people here, and patients often tell me that they are involved in some kind of activity that requires very detailed near vision. Myself, I create glass art with fusing and slumping techniques. No matter what activities my patients enjoy, they often require a range of vision, particularly from intermediate to near. So, I broke free from having to make them choose which distance was most important. Breaking free was all about increasing my patients' visual independence and the option to get the most out of their hobbies and interests. I think about myself. I need good near and intermediate vision when I'm working in my glass workshop, and I depend on my distance vision when I'm enjoying the outdoors. I may get a video call while I'm out on the water, and I need that near vision again to share the moment with a friend or family member. The ability to connect via technology has become a prominent part of our lives, and I suspect that video conferencing is here to stay. I want to make sure my patients can comfortably use their vision to connect, whether it's virtually or in person. In these changing times, it's more important than ever to be independent, to be able to freely participate in all of our hobbies and interests. With the PanOptix lens, 20/20 near, intermediate, and distance vision is now possible, making it my preferred lens for empowering patients. Break free from your comfort zone. Break free from limitations. Break free from the status quo. Break free from tradition with the Alcon Acrosoft IQ PanOptix Advanced Trifocal IOL.
think it looked like Kathy was giving a video lecture while she was kayaking.
I know. I was just saying, I think I'm jealous of Kathy's life. This is amazing. I need to get some new hobbies, that's for sure. So you've inspired us all.
Fun thing to do.
Kathy, for that. Jen.
Yes, well, now I'd like to take it away to another superstar. Let me share my screen. And basically, as we said a few minutes ago, Dr. Lawrence Woodard really needs no introduction. He actually is already a star that has risen, but we'd like to formally introduce him today. So Dr. Woodard is actually the medical director of his practice, the ONNIE Eye Services of Atlanta. And you can see his great resume, Morehouse College, Duke University, Shea Eye Institute, and also a fellowship in Louisville of cornea external diseases. And this actually, I find one of the most interesting pictures. And your first question of the evening, Lawrence, is what exactly are you doing here?
So this was a recent trip that we made to Cabo San Lucas, and we were, our kids, I have my wife, Melanie, my son, Kellen, who's 9, and my daughter, Nadia, who is 14. They all said, we really want to do something adventurous on this trip. So we did our research and we looked into this Polaris tour where we could actually drive and go. This was about an hour outside of Cabo San Lucas, so in the middle of the Baja Peninsula with no houses, no civilization around. And there's a trail that we were able to go on, and really just, I got the dirtiest I've ever been in my life on this trip, as you can see from this picture, as we're going through all the water and mud. So the kids had a blast, and they're ready to go back again already.
Yeah, that looks amazing. I like the fist pumps and the thumbs up there. So
Yes.
I definitely think that looks fun. I'm also jealous of your vacation. So
Yes.
this is
I'm ready
great.
to go back
Reminding
for sure.
us of better times. Yeah, good. Well, and this is also, I think, a follow-up photo, maybe to the earlier photo.
Yes, we made it to the summit there, and we were able to, really just overlook the entire area, and it's just such God's country up down there. So we really enjoyed it. And that's my crew, and it's because of them that I'm able to do what I do, and the reason why I do what I do.
That's amazing, and thank you again for sharing your expertise with us tonight. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Woodard to begin his presentation.
Oh, how about the panelists?
Right.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry about that. And I'd also like to introduce our fabulous celebrity panelists, including Dr. Dee Stevenson, also from Florida, and then Dr. Bonnie Henderson, and Dr. Rob Weinstock. So thank you all to our celebrity panelists for your time and participation this evening.
Excellent. All right. And Jen, am I ready to go? Did you?
Yeah. You can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. And there we go. All right, let's go to our slideshow. All right, well, thank you everyone so much for spending this evening with us. I'm really excited to talk about this topic today because it's something that's really dear to me and something that I've taken on as somewhat of a challenge to do what I can to try to help all of us understand the things we can do to help achieve outstanding refractive outcomes in challenging cataract surgeries. As we've shown my previous pictures there, let's move on to discuss kind of where we are now in cataract surgery in 2020. So many of us understand just how much the dynamic has changed in recent years as patients have become much more aware of the various options that are available to them due to internet, due to social media access that people have. They really have a much better understanding of the options available to them, which in turn has, I feel, increased their expectations. And so now people no longer think of cataract surgery simply as a procedure I'm going to do and I'm okay if I continue to wear glasses afterwards. People now think of cataract surgery very similarly to LASIK, where they expect to see well without glasses. And so now that they are hearing about different premium IOL options we have, different lasers that we can utilize with cataract surgery, they're expecting us to deliver on their goals of achieving good vision without glasses in many cases. So as our patients begin to ask for better outcomes through paying for premium lens options, they are expecting us to deliver on that. In addition, when you consider that other factors such as MIPS are on the horizon where we are going to be evaluated and compensated based on the outcomes we deliver in comparison to our colleagues, we really must do everything we can to achieve the best possible outcomes for our patients. So there are many things we can do to achieve these better outcomes and to help deliver what our patients are asking us for and what they're coming to us for. If you have viewed the previous episodes, you've seen very good presentations on things that can be done to manage the ocular surface to help improve our outcomes, things that can be done intraoperatively through using the proper techniques for certain types of cataracts, and as well as different devices that can be utilized during surgery to help deliver more consistent results. So I don't want to rehash those things. I want to kind of continue in this realm of additional things we can do to increase our patient outcomes. So I really want to focus on the preoperative diagnostic tools that are available to us now, as well as intraoperative tools that can help us identify patients that maybe wouldn't ordinarily achieve the best possible outcome, and the various things we can do to help them and help improve our outcomes. So there's a number of things that I consider kind of my main categories of ways that I try to address these patients. First of all, we need the latest technology biometers, as well as utilizing modern IOL calculation formulas. We're going to talk about all the things on this list in more detail. I just want to highlight them right now. How we manage preoperative astigmatism is also critical to delivering good outcomes for patients, because if we don't manage the astigmatism properly, they definitely will not be completely happy with their vision. I like using digital image guidance during surgery because we have lasers now that can cut to the micron, and we have IOLs that we know exactly where their astigmatic correction is, yet in many cases are making marks on the cornea with their hands, and that really helps prevent us from being as accurate as possible. Also, implementing some type of capsulotomy device, whether that's a femtosecond laser or other devices on the market, to help deliver a more consistent, more round and more predictable and centered capsulotomy, I also feel helps improve our outcomes. Utilizing intraoperative aberrometry as well as astigmatism management during surgery, I also feel helps improve outcomes, and I'm going to share some of my results with you to help support why I know that my patients do better because I utilize those technologies during surgery. And lastly on this list, but possibly the most important, is that we track our outcomes and that we optimize for each IOL that we're using so that we can really and truly deliver the best results based on our specific surgical technique. So one of the things that I think everyone should move towards is a new biometry technology called swept source OCT. So we know that the implementation of optical biometry a number of years ago really improved the consistency and repeatability of our axial length measurements. However, we still have some challenges with patients that have very dense cataracts, dense PSCs, or mature white cataracts, where optical biometry really is not successful in achieving and obtaining an axial length in those patients. So we're still susceptible to having refractive surprises if we're not able to use a good, repeatable, automated device to measure axial length. And that's where swept source OCT comes in and really has the ability to much more accurately measure axial length, even in the most challenging of cataracts. And so I would encourage everyone to move towards swept source OCT through one of the currently available devices here in the US that I feel really improves outcomes in those challenging cases. So as we take a look at Bill Russell here, one of my favorite players who, though I'm not from Boston, I have an affinity for the Celtics, and certainly he was quite an amazing Celtics player with a total of 11 championship rings. Certainly no one can question that he was constantly striving for excellence. And it's incumbent upon all of us as surgeons to do the same. Again, the only way we can do that is if we're tracking our outcomes. Many people feel, yes, I get good outcomes with cataract surgery, but if you're not tracking, how do you know? And how do you know if it isn't possible to improve those outcomes even further? So one of the things I'd like to highlight that I've been really frustrated with our ophthalmic community over the years is that somewhere along the line, it has become accepted that the way in which we track our outcomes is by identifying the percentage of patients that are within a half diopter of the intended target. And in my eyes, that really is the minimum. That's not the maximum. That's not doing all that we can. And what I mean by that is, let's take, for example, we have a patient that is getting a multifocal IOL. We choose a minus 0.25 as their intended target, and our postoperative outcome comes back as a minus 0.75. They are within a half diopter of that intended target, but are they happy? No, absolutely not. Their distance vision is not what they were bargaining for when they paid all this extra money. So in my practice, I do not look at a half diopter as an acceptable outcome. So I think we all need to change our thinking to really make that number more like a quarter of a diopter. And if we are within a quarter of a diopter of the intended target, we're much more likely to achieve an outcome that the patient will be happy with. So in order to do that, though, the preoperative evaluation becomes extremely important, and we must identify certain factors that predispose certain patients to having a refractive surprise postoperatively. So the first thing I think that's critical to look at is that we analyze the corneal topography in detail. We don't simply look at how much astigmatism is present on a topography. We use it to determine the character, whether it's symmetrical or asymmetrical, whether dryness is playing a factor in that topography, and to determine if there's enough astigmatism present on anterior surface topography to consider astigmatism management with possibly a toric IOL or another means. I also utilize the topography and compare it to the manifest refraction and the current refraction in the patient's glasses to determine if there might be some inconsistency between the amount of astigmatism present on the anterior surface of the cornea through the topography and what's actually manifest in their glasses or their manifest refraction. We also need to critically look at the biometry. And historically, we've looked at axial length and keratometry, and obviously we know those are the two major factors in the IOL power calculation. But we also need to pay more attention to the patient's white-to-white diameter, the anterior chamber depth, the lens thickness, because those are other parameters that can clue us in that this is not necessarily a normal eye. And in many cases, it's the eyes that are not normal that are more susceptible to refractive surprises. And so we have to do a better job of identifying those patients preoperatively. So again, are there any red flags on any of those measurements that would clue us in? And we'll talk about that in detail. Also, planning their astigmatism correction is critical. You must go into the operating room with a plan and be prepared to adjust that plan if you're getting more measurements intraoperatively. And lastly, are our patients' goals achievable? They may want a certain level or premium lens, but if their cornea or ocular system isn't consistent with a good outcome with that lens, we need to address that with the patient and not simply do something that may give them a false sense of hope in terms of the quality of their vision after surgery. So let's talk about some of the limitations of the modern formulas. And so we know that utilizing modern formulas has greatly improved our accuracy compared to first, second, and third generation IOL calculation formulas. But modern formulas are still susceptible to some of the same issues that have plagued us over the years with the prior generation formulas, though they do a much better job than the older formulas. So we realize that most formulas do a great job with normal eyes, that is normal axial length, keratometry, anterior chamber depth. When those parameters are normal, most formulas do a very good job. But there are some patients that that are outliers in any of these given parameters, which is what will predispose them to some surprises postoperatively. Something I like to refer to as axial length versus keratometry mismatch. And so what I mean is in most cases, if a patient has a long eye, they typically have steeper Ks. If they have a shorter eye, they typically have flatter Ks. But there are some people that don't follow that. And so some people with longer eyes may have slightly flatter Ks, and people with shorter eyes may have slightly steeper Ks. And I've realized that those are some people that are more susceptible to these refractive surprises postoperatively. Also, our toric calculators do a much better job of helping us minimize the amount of residual astigmatism postoperatively. However, these toric calculators are still based on population averages for the amount of posterior corneal astigmatism that's present for the majority of patients. And so all of the calculators assume that patients have 0.3 to 0.4 diopters of residual postoperative against the rule of astigmatism, but we all know some people don't follow that. They might not have any posterior corneal astigmatism, or they may have some with the rule posterior corneal astigmatism. So if we're not measuring specifically each patient's eye, we're missing an opportunity to get the best possible outcome in some of those patients. And so I feel that intraoperative data obtained after removing the cataract can provide some very useful information for our patients that can help improve our outcomes. Now, this is nothing new. Jack Holliday, as far as 1988, published significant work in JCRS, which showed that 92% of the refractive surprises in that study could be identified by using data screening criteria, meaning eyes that were shorter than 22 millimeters or greater than 25 millimeters, you could identify those people as being ones that would have refractive surprises. Same with very flat Ks or very steep Ks. And also if the average corneal power was greater than a diopter, if the axial length was greater than 0.3 millimeter difference from one eye to the next, or if the average corneal power was greater than a diopter from one eye to the next, that increased the chance of those patients having refractive surprises. So we've known this for many years. The older formulas certainly weren't as good as the modern formulas in these scenarios, but there's still opportunity for improvement. One of the reasons for that is that all formulas, modern formulas, use some way of trying to predict the effective lens position. And in most cases, it's the anterior chamber depth and the lens thickness that are incorporated into that effective lens position prediction. So there are some people who do not follow the norm in that situation. Let's say we have a really dense, thick cataract that shallows the anterior chamber a lot. Once we remove that cataract, that anterior chamber depth is going to change more in that patient than it does the average patient. And that's one of the things that will increase their chances of getting a refractive surprise. And many studies have shown that as much as 20 to 40% of the errors in the prediction of the postoperative anterior chamber depth may occur due to this issue with effective lens position and anterior chamber depth relationship. So it's really important that we utilize as many technologies as possible to help identify some of these patients that otherwise might be susceptible to these issues. So I have a panel question for my esteemed panelists on. Do you all make any adjustments to your IOL power predictions in high myopes or high hyperopes, and specifically related to the IOL calculation formula that you use? Do you use one formula more than another, or do you make any specific adjustments to your formula in these scenarios? Panel?
Well, I would say, Lawrence, I think these are, effective lens position is the holy grail. We know that, right?
Absolutely.
And no matter how good we are with our calculations, the things that are the outliers, the high myopes and the high hyperopes, or even the low hyperopes, post refractive patients, we all know that we have to find something that works for us. So for me, Aura has been kind of my go-to. I run all the calculations with all the different formulas, but still, we have over 1 million cases in Aura and we've gotten so much better with these outliers that I really rely still on Aura for my final prediction. So that would be my comment to how do we adjust for that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Other panelists?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I always agree with Dee, first of all. She's
There
always,
you go. Can't go wrong there.
you can't go wrong. But, that's absolutely right. I think in this day and age of 2020, it's a shame not to use intraoperative aberrometry. I think, 10 years ago, we can have this controversial debate about whether it's good or not. But now at this point, I think it's really common knowledge that that's a really wonderful benefit to have. So for those of us lucky enough to have one, I think we always rely on that. Earlier on, I would, do IOL power calculation changes based on the formulas for our long axial lengths. For example, I know Jack Holliday has a formula. You can access it on Warren Hill's website. You can even Google it. You can use a fudge factor to make that assessment. But now, I think after doing this for 100 years, I think I look at the length, and if it's long, I know to just aim to make sure that the patient ends up a little bit more myopic, because I worry that they're going to end up hyperopic. And then I use Aura to be kind of a tiebreaker. So, a lot of this, after a while, after you've done this many times, you realize that you really have to, change the power by half a diopter, even a full diopter based on the axial length. So the other thing I wanted to highlight was some of the literature, the peer-reviewed literature that looked at the outcomes of hyperopes and with a really short axial length. And Lawrence, I know you've done this in the past, and I've learned a lot from your lectures. And what I learned was that the studies have shown that the higher incidence of refractive errors were actually in the really short axial length hyperopes. A lot of people think about the myopes, but it's actually really the hyperopes that you have to look out for, those sneaky little those.
No, absolutely. We're fortunate in that there aren't as many of those as the high myopes, but absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I will be sharing some thoughts and results of mine on that to kind of highlight exactly what you're saying.
And Bonnie, I agree with you with, hyperopes. So they're the hardest thing, just like post-RK patients. They're the hardest things to figure out. And I know that, with all the data that's in Aura, for me, that's the go-to place. And, you're still going to find yourself as an outlier every now and then. You end up having to back calculate something before you do the patient's second eye. But that's a learning curve, and that's what you put in Aura. That's how we make Aura data better. So I think that, Lawrence and Bonnie, you guys are, some of the premier people that do all of these odd things. And, I think that, as long as we keep learning about this, we know where to start and where to finish. So I think it's really important. Putting your data in a data bank is so important.
Absolutely.
Did you just say that Lawrence and I do odd things? I think that's
what I got out of that.
You do odd things in a very good way, Molly. Very good way.
I think it's actually Rob's fault. I'm just going to blame it on.
Blame it on Rob.
Yeah, blame it on Rob.
Absolutely. Well.
Oh, hold on 1 second. I think Jen has a question.
Say that again. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just wondering too. If anyone has used like the light adjustable lens as well for like a hyperope or a myope. Has anyone used that?
Jen, I'm using that lens, and I was going to mention that somewhere along the way. But to Dee and Bonnie's points and to Lawrence's, I think it's obvious we have to use all these tools, you know, to make the best decision, because there is no one right formula. And like you said, Lawrence, there are some formulas that are better for smaller eyes or longer eyes. And
Right.
the other equation is that the patients with these unusual eyes, whether it's a macular problem or a corneal problem or high myopia or high hyperopia, they need to understand that the surgery is not perfect, and even in normal eyes. And that's why it's important that all patients who undergo refractive cataract surgery understand that not everything is within the surgeon's control, no matter how good a job we do and how many measurements. And that's why we build enhancement strategies on the backside of cataract surgery, so it's not a failure. So we tell our patients, it's in the documentation, that no matter how good we do and how many times we measure the eye, there's a small chance, maybe a 5% chance, that you may need a laser touch-up. And it's not considered failure, it's part of the process of getting from point A to point B. And that way they're not surprised on the back end after cataract surgery that's not perfect. This is no big deal. We just need to do a little touch-up. Sometimes it's a little astigmatism management at the slit lamp with a manual AK. We're taking them back to the laser for an AK. Could be a toric rotation, could be PRK, or even LASIK on a younger patient who has a nice ocular surface for quick healing. And to Jen's point, for some of these really weird eyes, as we learn more about the light adjustable lens, and we've been using it for about a year now, we're broadening the horizon. So it kind of first started out for, you know, low-hanging fruit, post-LASIK patients, post-RK patients, people who were perfectionists that came in seeking the very best of technology with an adjustable lens. But now, listening to you, Lawrence, and listening to my esteemed panel, maybe the high hyperopes and the high myopes, those risk factors, as you pointed out,
Yes.
Maybe those are some of the right patients to say, hey, there is a technology out there that allows us to clean things up easily afterwards if it's not perfect. And you are in a category of patients that may be higher risk for it to be off a little bit after surgery. So it's a good question, Jen. I think there's a real need for that type of technology in our toolbox.
Agreed.
Absolutely. And keep your thoughts, Rob, in the forefront of your mind, because I'm going to ask a question later in the talk about things we do to manage those patients where we get some refractive surprises and when we do one versus another. So everyone be thinking about that. It's coming. So briefly, I wanted to talk, this was a beautiful segue into Aura, which is a technology that provides something that none of the other technologies on the market can provide in terms of giving us intraoperative data based on an aphakic refraction to give us one more type of measurement to help us implement the different things we need to think about to help get our best outcome. So Aura is comprised of an aberrometer head, or the body, which is connected to the microscope, which allows for the aphakic refraction after the cataract has been removed. And it also consists of a brain, which is the set of algorithms that are used with Aura to help predict the IOL power and also to help optimize our results postoperatively based on post-op data that we enter in on the refractive outcome of the patient. So let's go over some of the features. Again, it provides real live streaming aphakic and pseudophakic refraction. So even after we put in a toric IOL, we're able to determine if that IOL at its current location gives us a refraction that's acceptable or not. It takes into account the posterior cornea and the wound impact specific for that patient. So instead of just saying, oh, this patient most likely has 0.4 diopters of against the rule astigmatism, it's taken that into account when it does its refraction and the impact of the wound incision to see what the overall refraction of the eye is. So it's given us intraoperative data that we use along with our preoperative data to help us as surgeons determine the lens that we want to use for this patient. And then it has a global as well as personalized database with tens, hundreds of thousands of eyes in it to help us personalize and track our outcomes. So first of all, Aura is something that relies on good biometry. So it's not utilize Aura and not utilize optical biometry. Aura needs good biometry to help fine tune our results. So it's never one or the other. It's always in tandem to help us achieve our best outcomes. One thing that it does not utilize that modern formulas do utilize is that it does not anterior chamber depth or the lens thickness to calculate its lens effective lens position. It actually utilizes what's referred to as the wave-tech factor, which incorporates the postoperative outcomes that are entered into Aura to determine a factor that must be applied to the IOL constant to help fine-tune the effective lens position. So in the scenario I gave earlier, where a patient had a really mature cataract and the anterior chamber depth changed a lot postoperatively, Aura is not influenced by that type of a patient because anterior chamber depth is not a part of the equation for the algorithm. Again, we said the aphakic data gives us some additional data. Aphakic refraction gives us additional data. And we've already talked about the effective lens position and how it's not prone to those same possible situations. So we don't want to simply be accurate or precise. We want to be accurate and precise when determining our IOL choice for our patients. So managing or having the ability to determine the amount of astigmatism intraoperatively allows us to better customize the toric IOL selection for the patient, allows us to identify the steep axis, again, based on the wound impact and the posterior cornea contribution to those two things. And it also allows us to confirm the IOL placement after with a toric IOL. In addition, we're able to fine tune our results even if we're not using a toric IOL. Let's say we do femtosecond laser surgery and we make arcuate incisions and utilize Aura to determine whether or not you need to open those incisions, or if you have opened them, whether or not they gave you the amount of effect you needed. If they didn't, you have the option of extending that incision or creating limbal relaxing incisions on the table based on live refraction. So there's an ability to customize the procedure with Aura that you don't have if you're only using preoperative information. I'd now like to cover a few cases that'll highlight a lot of the things we've talked about and show us how we have to really be evaluating all of these patients more discreetly than we have in the past, now that we're learning some of this information. So this first case is a 71-year-old male, 3+ nuclear sclerosis, refraction -1.25 with a half diopter of astigmatism that's close to against the rule. Their vision's only 20/50. Their axis is 155 degrees with their refraction. If we look at their A scan, we have an amount of astigmatism also at 160 degrees, so close to our topography axis. But our A scan only shows a half diopter of astigmatism, which is very similar to what that refraction was. But remember, that patient was only 20/50. And so that refraction really, how much can we trust it? So let's also look at their topography. And this is what I mean when I say we have to critically evaluate topography. Because at first glance, if we just look at the numbers, it shows only 0.06 diopters of astigmatism, and it shows it at 90 degrees. And so as we all know, topography really averages the K readings over the entire surface of the cornea. But from a refractive standpoint, we really care about the central, 3-4 millimeters or so. So if you look at the central 3 to 4 millimeters of this cornea, you'll see, based on the line I've drawn is how I identify this cornea, there is some astigmatism present at approximately this axis. And if you draw that out, you'll see that axis is roughly 160 degrees. So it's very similar to our refraction as well as our A scan measurement. However, if you're only looking at the total amount of astigmatism, you would say, oh, there's no reason I would need to do a toric lens in this patient, right? But we know this is astigmatism that's close to against the rule, and this might be a patient where we have some surprises in. So I chose to do Aura in this case. And if you look at the right side of the screen, you'll see Aura measured 0.69 diopters against the rule astigmatism, 0.71 diopters on another measurement, and we got 0.9 on this measurement. But I didn't like that one so much, so I wasn't really relying on that one. I identified these two as the two that I felt were the best measurements. And they were quite consistent with measuring preoperatively in terms of the axis. However, we're getting a little more astigmatism here, 0.7 diopters. So in this case, the person wanted a multifocal IOL. And if you leave a patient with a multifocal IOL with 0.7 diopters of residual astigmatism, we know they're not going to be extremely happy. So utilizing Aura, I chose a lowest power multifocal toric, the T3, and put that lens in, and we obtained our no rotation recommended, so we know we had it on the right axis, and we obtained the amount of residual astigmatism very close to what was anticipated based on the K readings. So our follow-up with this patient showed that their uncorrected acuity was 20/20 at a distance with a plano refraction, and the patient was extremely happy. So here I put a T3 lens in a patient that in many cases, if you're only looking at the anterior surface of the eye, you may not choose to put a toric lens in, and you would not get a patient who was with a plano refraction and extremely happy.
Jump in and make a comment about that, Lawrence.
Sure, absolutely.
That's a great case. Can you back up to the slide with the Aura?
This one or the previous?
Previous one. So the
This
reason
one?
I highlight was this is a great case to show why if you just take pre-op data, it's not going to give you the right result. Just like Lauren said, imagine, remember the steep axis is 155. And so this is a left eye, is that right? So
correct.
Where your incision is. So oftentimes the incision, you could be operating on the flat axis. So if you're operating on the flat axis, you're going to induce maybe even up to a half a diopter of flattening. And so what you may do is in your mind, preoperatively, this patient may not have a lot of cylinder. They may have, half a diopter, just like Lawrence was saying, but then you operate on the flat axis and then you induce another half and you end up with a diopter. So you can see why something like an intraoperative reading will give you a more accurate reading. And especially when you're using a multifocal lens, you really want to nail the target. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think for Lawrence, it's probably second nature. He's already thinking about this, but for those who may be thinking of that detail, it's just really important to think about those things. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. Absolutely. So you already...
Bonnie segueing on what Bonnie said too, and remember, everybody's talking about, elliptical, what you induce with your incisions. But, for the new people using intraoperative aberrometry or even just taking on, astigmatism correction, you need to know what your SIA is both for your right eye and your left eye. You also need to look at your incisions to see if you've induced any swelling, your side port incision, your main incision, because I had a case today, perfect example. I probably induced a diopter of against the rule astigmatism because I operate at 12 o'clock because I'm an old guy. I operate at 12. The guy had, a 4 millimeter pupil and a 5+ brunescent cataract, and I did femto on him. But I induced some astigmatism, so I backed off on what I corrected and went with what my preoperative values were. So, I was taught by the school of Michael Breen. Your first reading, if it's good, is the reading you should go with, because once your cornea starts to decompensate, you're going to get a variation.
Absolutely.
So your first one is really good. And remember, when you just want to make sure that the swelling of your wound and how dry the cornea is. I think Bonnie made a really perfect example, as did you, show that the hardest correction to treat is low ad astigmatism, and unfortunately, T3 for PanOptics and the T3 for the Alcon lenses don't treat that. You have to remember that Bausch & Lomb has a lens that treats 0.9 at the cornea and 0.75 or 0.77 at the plane, and you need to know that you can flip the axis from 180 to 90. So you just need to be really smart with what your incision looks like. And what Aura taught me is how bad my incisions were. So I really needed to made me a better surgeon by identifying that. So small astigmatism is the toughest astigmatism. We all can nail the big stuff, but you did a really great case there, Lawrence, for low astigmatism with magnitude and axis. So just be smart about that. And everybody needs to, think about where their incisions are and how much they're actually inducing.
Absolutely.
Lawrence, what I like about your case is that you've exemplified the real difference between what older kind of basic cataract surgery was when I learned to do cataract surgery and what modern refractive cataract surgery is. And it's a dynamic process. You don't just plan your surgery. When you plan your surgery, you plan for the lens, you plan for your management. But thinking and making decisions in the operating room is part of the new process of refractive cataract surgery, and being able to have all that information at your disposal to make a good decision. You had to make that decision on the fly, and that's a new paradigm for a lot of surgeons to get around. They're used to getting in the operating room and just having a plan and doing it, and now you're making decisions. So it takes a little bit of a change to do that, and there's a lot of ways to approach that too. So for your case, what I thought you were going to do, I mean, you did a phenomenal management with a low power toric. Another management, and we do this a lot, is if we can't get a consistent good K reading pre-op and it's low and we're not sure of the axis and we have multiple axes on multiple devices like you showed, and we know it's not dry eye because we treated dry eye and it looks good, we'll do a AK, what we call per aura. So we'll do a refraction, we'll look at how much that astigmat is, we'll compare it to what the pre-op measurements show, and we'll do a manual AK on the table in the aphakic state and correct a low amount of astigmatism right then and there. I mean, if everything looks good pre-op and there's a lot of alignment between multiple technologies, that's easy. You program your femtosecond laser for that low amount, that arcuate, you plan your toric. But this is a great example of how it's become a thinking process during surgery. It's a great example.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, for those comments. And it shows how, like we talked about, you're customizing the surgery for that patient. And that's what's necessary in order to really achieve the best possible outcomes. So we really answered that panel question without even me asking it. So great job, guys. I'll move on to case number 2. And this, let me give you some highlights on this case. This is a long axial length eye, but average case. So some of that keratometry, axial length mismatch we were talking about. And it ended up generating an eye that gave me a toric and a IOL power surprise compared to what I was thinking preoperatively. So this is a 64-year-old female, 69-year-old female who wants to read well without glasses postoperatively. Her refraction was -850 plus 175 at 60 degrees. And her goal was to be able to read and see the computer without glasses. So our target was a -175 sphere with a toric lens. So this is her left eye. If we look at our topography, it shows 1.4 diopters at roughly that 60 degree, 55 to 60 degree range that was present on the refraction. If we look at one measurement, one biometry device, it shows 1.5 diopters at 61, so quite consistent with pre-op measurements. This is a Barrett calculation formula. It states that an 11.5 diopter lens would make us closest to our 1.75 target, and it recommends using a T3 lens if we don't want to flip the axis. This is a Barrett formula. Also, let's look at an SRKT, an older formula. We do expect our modern formulas to be more accurate. However, in this case, SRKT also recommends an 11.5 diopter to be -1.75. Again, this axial length is 27 millimeters, almost 28 millimeters, and our average Ks are only 43. So a very long eye, but we're not that 45, 46 Ks that you would expect sometimes with these long eyes. So we have two different formulas that both say 11.5 diopters. This is not a post-refractive eye. We look at Aura recommended a 12.5 diopter lens to leave it closest to minus 1.75. That's number one. Number two, Aura gave us measurements that were showing more 2 diopters of astigmatism as opposed to 1.5 diopters. I chose to put in a T5 lens as opposed to a T3 lens that our preoperative data would suggest. Our residual astigmatism with that T5 lens was only 0.1, and we used that 12.5 diopter lens like I suggested. Our postoperative outcome was exactly minus 1.75 sphere. Now, it doesn't always happen this well. This is a great example, though, that shows this is an eye that we could identify preoperatively as one that would possibly be at risk for a refractive surprise because we had this axial length keratometry mismatch. And I think we really have to pay more attention to all parameters, not just one or two things like we've historically paid attention to. And the patient was extremely happy with that outcome. For the sake of time, I want to move on to our third case. And that is a post-LASIK eye, very long axial length and very flat Ks, as we would expect post-LASIK. 73-year-old male, had LASIK in 2005 in Canada, so we didn't have any pre-LASIK refractive data. Refraction minus 0.75 plus 150 at 140, so our steep axis on refraction is 140. This is the left eye. If we look at our topography, the steep axis here, if you draw our line, is yes, we're getting kind of low 130s, but definitely different than what our simply looking at the topography would show. Also, look at how flat these Ks are, 35 millimeters, extremely flat. And when we get at these extremes, again, these are opportunities for surprises, even in post-LASIK eyes from traditional formulas, even the formulas that are post-LASIK. So if we look at the regular Barrett formula, and first, if we look at our astigmatism, it's showing 1.45 at 100, similar to what our topo was showing in terms of the axis. Regular Barrett showed a 15 diopter lens and utilizing a T4 to keep the patient with minimal astigmatism. Whereas our Barrett toric, our Barrett True K is recommending that 17.5. So a significant difference, as we would expect, going from Barrett to Barrett True K. What does Aura say? Aura recommended a 16.5 diopter lens and a T5. Aura was measuring roughly 2 diopters of astigmatism. So here we have a topography and Ks from our biometry that were very similar in terms of the amount, but Aura was measuring more. So I chose to follow Aura, as I've learned to do when I get good, consistent measurements. I trust Aura over my preoperative formulas, and Aura recommended, again, a 16.5 and a T5. We did obtain our NRR with that, with less than a half diopter of residual astigmatism, and our postoperative refraction was minus 0.5 plus 0.25 at 82. So even if we had used Barrett True K, we would have used a whole diopter higher power lens that we ended up using. So that's a patient that maybe would have been within a half diopter of our intended target, but they would not have been within a quarter diopter like they ended up. And again, that's our focus here, to fine tune our results as much as possible. So quickly, because we are running short on time, I mentioned earlier that we would talk about how we would handle postoperative refractive surprises. My question is, briefly, if the panel would answer, how would we make the decision between doing if we have a toric IOL power, a toric surprise, how would we make the decision to enhance versus exchange if we got a residual astigmatism that was more than we anticipated?
Well, for me, the biggest thing is that it's effective lens position in a post-refractive eye. But I will tell you that with using Aura in post-refractive eyes, no matter what the post-refractive procedure was, I still find that I'm better than I would be if I just went with my preoperative measurements. So, for
Absolutely.
me, I would go with what Aura says. Think about where the effective lens position is, and you have to wait. You have to give it some time, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, and then if you're going to enhance or exchange, then I'd call Michael Breen and say, "Now calculate this and tell me where I'm wrong." But utilize the people that know this technology. But I really go with what, for all post refractive, I really go with what Aura says now with all the data that's in their data bank.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And I think your question is also, would you exchange versus enhance? And for me, it depends on what's the magnitude of the refractive surprise. Is it spherical versus just the rotation? If it's simply a rotational error, I'll rotate it. If there's a large spherical error, then I will exchange it. If it's a small amount, then I'll do a corneal refractive procedure to enhance it. So I think that hopefully that was your question.
Yes.
To add to what these wonderful women have suggested about enhancement strategies is that everyone is a little bit different, and you have to, just like you do preoperatively, you have to assess the situation. And with the toric lenses, it becomes challenging because a lot of us, the blue ink marks are gone. You don't know where the lens is really sitting. You don't know where it was when you put it in at the end of the case. I use LENSAR's refractive capsulotomy technology with little nubs or marks on the capsulotomy, so I know what the intended axis was, or I have a reference point. And if I see the lens is significantly off of that axis, I will put it, go back in and rotate it and put it back on axis. If it's right where I left it, I'll let the eye heal a little bit, and I might approach another strategy.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I agree with all of those sentiments. So I want to focus now on how we track our outcomes and questions that we can answer by tracking them. The questions we can answer are we getting outcomes that are as good as LASIK? That's what patients are expecting when they're saying they're paying for eye surgery. They, in many cases, don't care whether it's LASIK or cataract surgery. They're paying for eye surgery and want great outcomes. Does femtosecond laser improve our refractive or minimize our refractive error? Are our outcomes worse with longer or shorter eyes? Are our toric outcomes good enough? And does Aura improve upon our modern formulas? Well, if you're not tracking your outcomes, you can't answer all these questions. So the beauty of having a device that allows us to track our outcomes is to generate reports that we can customize to answer these questions by how we ask the report to generate the reports. So this is an example of an Aura report, which we refer to as Aura versus pre-op. So what was the outcome utilizing what Aura was predicting versus what our preoperative calculation formulas were recommending? These are my results directly from my Aura cart that were generated directly from Aura, so not manipulated in any way. I have 803 eyes. All of these all of these patients were done with femtosecond lasers. And if we look at our percentage of patients within a half diopter, with the green being Aura and the gray being preoperative formulas, we see that they're very close, 94% within a half with Aura, 91% within a half with pre-op formulas, so that they are very close in my results. However, when we look at the percentage of patients within a half diopter, that difference starts to separate, 73% versus 61%. So when I utilize Aura versus my preoperative formulas, 12 more patients out of 100 are going to be within a quarter diopter. And that's a significant number to me. Those are 12 patients that I may not have to enhance, go back to the operating room, do up. We're improving outcomes in my case when utilizing Aura, and that's what tracking your outcomes allows you to do. That also gives me a lot of firepower when my patients ask me, you know, what are my outcomes like? What kind of results do I get? I have data that I can quote the patient. And you'd be surprised how many engineers or other type A people really get excited when I can quote them these types of figures. That really says a lot about the surgeon, I think, if they can do that. The next report is in IOLs, but also no femtosecond laser. And you can see our accuracy drops down a little bit when no femtosecond laser is used. We have 104 eyes in the system in this case. And if we look specifically at our percent within a quarter diopter, we've gone to 72% with aura, only 52% without aura. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is the fluctuation in capsulotomy size when we don't utilize aura. And I mean, when we don't utilize a femtosecond laser. So if you don't use a femtosecond laser and you don't utilize aura, you've lost 2 opportunities to fine tune your results as much as possible. And I think that's what this outcome suggests. The next one is when the lens power was changed based on what aura recommended compared to the pre-op formulas. So there are 46% of my patients, I actually changed the IOL power in terms of which one was closest to the intended target with aura. And of those 46% of the eyes, that was a total of 418 patients, what was my outcome with aura versus if I had gone with what pre-op formula recommended? And percent within a half is a little bit different, 92% within aura versus 83% with pre-op formulas at a half. But look at the difference at a quarter, 75% versus 41. And this is how we're able to customize using intraoperative aberrometry and that aphakic refraction to help increase the number of people that are within a quarter of a diopter. That's our goal, not a half, but a quarter. That's a significant difference. And we're talking about premium lenses, that the significance of that can't be understated. And these, again, were non-post refractive eyes. Now, let's look at the long eyes, greater than 25.5 millimeters.
Lawrence, you might need to
Yes.
close up sooner. We have about a few minutes left. So
okay, we're only got a couple more. So thank you for that. So percentage within a quarter diopter of the long eyes is 72% with aura versus 52% with pre-op formulas, with a total of 180 eyes in that category. We were talking earlier about the shorter eyes, less than 22 millimeters in this report. Only 23 eyes here, but look at the difference, 78% within a quarter versus 48% with our preoperative formulas. If we look at my results with managing astigmatism, 95% of my patients are within a half diopter of residual astigmatism with aura, and 85% within a quarter diopter. And that actually outperforms the toric calculation formulas with all the results that I've seen on published data. And I have a total of 492 eyes in this, so that's not a small number of patients. Also, the question of is femtosecond versus non-femtosecond laser having an impact on our outcomes? In this one report, which is only toric IOLs, where we have 334 femtosecond patients that got a toric IOL versus only 60 that got a toric IOL without femto, we see the difference in percentage of people within a quarter diopter, 77% when manual technique was versus 87% with the laser. And that, I feel, speaks primarily to the accuracy of having a consistent capsulotomy size and centration compared to doing a manual capsulotomy. Also, incision may play a role there with the laser being slightly more predictable. Our post-LASIK eyes, my results show 91% within a half versus 65% within a quarter. Comparing it to pre-op really isn't normal, isn't accurate here, because this is regular Barrett, not Barrett True-K, because you can't enter in Barrett True-K into aura because it will skew your results. So in summarizing my how we obtain good post-operative outcomes, again, good biometry data with modern formulas is critical. Analyzing our preoperative topography and Ks and determining which patients are at risk for refractive surprises is really important. Managing the astigmatism preoperatively and think how we're going to manage it is critical. In my case, femtosecond laser improves my outcomes over my manual procedures, and intraoperative aberrometry improves my results as well. But the take home here is if you do not track your outcomes, you do not know if you are as successful as you could be. So I leave everyone here today with the important message of let's track our outcomes, let's optimize our results as much as possible to give our patients everything they are asking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lawrence, for that fantastic talk. And I think it really explains a lot to do with the challenging situations that we want to achieve these really, really good refractive outcomes from. Having said that, I think we have crossed or shot over our time for today, but we will do one question from the list of questions we have. So Jen, I have put up some questions. Could you?
Yes. Thank you. And thank you again, Lawrence. Amazing talk. I learned so much.
Thank you.
But yeah, so we did have a really great question from the audience about flipping the axis with a toric lens. Any thoughts on that, Lawrence or the panelists?
I'm certainly open to flipping the axis from against the rule to with the rule. Usually kind of my target is I don't want to go more than a quarter diopter of residual with the rule if I'm going to flip it. I am not a fan of flipping from with the rule to against the rule, but there are certain scenarios where you have to choose between leaving someone with, let's say, 0.4 diopters of with the rule versus 0.05 of against the rule. Then I would consider it, especially for an older patient. But any more than that, I would not leave someone with against the rule astigmatism.
Agreed.
Agreed. I think a small amount, it's okay to flip the axis, but not a large amount. I think most people don't want to completely see differently than they did preoperatively.
And it also, with increased depth of field, if you leave them with a rule a little bit. And my only one comment about all of this is the amazing thing about Aura is for those 10% of patients that were not getting a toric lens that are now getting a toric lens because you measured it with Aura, those are the happy patients. So that's where also Aura shines. And Lawrence, you have shown that before in presentations that I've been witness to. So very nice job tonight. Thank you, kind sir.
Rob.
Thank you for being on the panel.
Rob, we'll close with your last comment on what's your take on pinhole IOL for these situations, for these challenging cases, and how do you think that will perform in the future?
Ashwin, I wish I could talk from, my own experience on pinhole optics and IOLs. Because, you all know me. I don't really like to say anything unless I've used it myself and I can talk honestly about it. We don't have that technology in the US yet. I can tell you I've seen some camera patients that is not IOL plane, but corneal plane. And I have not been overly impressed with that. Now there's other issues. You've got corneal haze, you've got flap related issues. It's a total different optic system. But, I think that it's a potential promise. I think honestly, the best use of that lens is going to be in really unhealthy eyes with keratoconus, terrible arcade with all sorts of irregular astigmatism where you really don't have any other choice. In my mind, it's going to at least start as a last ditch IOL for somebody with a really, really aberrated eye where you're like, anything bigger than 3 millimeters is going to cause all sorts of aberrations. But again, we're not going to know until it's in our hands and we're using it, but I commend the people that are working with it and the companies that are continuing to push innovation and try to find other solutions, because no single eye is the same. They're all different. And what's right for one person might not be right for someone else. So the more tools we can be provided with, the better chance our patients, we're going to find something that's going to work for them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you so much, Kathy. First of all, thank you so much for being here throughout the session and being part of us with us. Dee, Bonnie, Lawrence, and Rob, thank you so much. Without you, the show would not be possible. And thank you very much, everybody. Bill and Jen, without you, backbone of the system, I don't think we can actually take this to the next level. Having said that, I know we have crossed our time for today, but it was a fantastic and extremely educative session, more interaction than ever before. For the next round, we're going to have our next episode on November 17th, same time. So be ready. We'll be sending out some flyers very soon. Thank you so much. Good night.
Talk.
Good morning.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate all your help with this.
Taking apart.
Great job, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Stay
Thanks, Beth.
safe.
Bye.
And vote.
Yes, vote.